5 and 6, it's me, Mr. A, back with story time for another day, and chapter 21 of Tom's Midnight Garden. Chapter 21, Time and Time Again. For the rest of Tuesday night, Tom lay in bed, at first thinking and then at last dreaming, but of the same things, and of other things that floated up from the bottom of his mind and joined them. He dreamed that it was his last night here. He went downstairs to go into the garden, but he found that the angel had come down from the clock face and, grown to giant size, barred the way with a flaming sword. Yet Tom would not be withstood. So at last the angel stepped aside from the doorway. When Tom looked through it, he saw that the garden had gone, and there was only a paved yard with dustbins, and in the middle stood old Mrs. Bartholomew, angrily saying, "Who has been meddling with the time of my grandfather clock?" Then Tom woke, and at once all the strange dream things sank back again to the bottom of his mind, and into it rushed the ideas and questions and incomplete pieces of reasoning from his waking hours. Tom thought again. Time no longer. The angel and the grandfather clock had sworn it. But if time is ever to end, that means that here and now, time itself is only a temporary thing. It can be dispensed with, perhaps, or rather, it can be dodged. Tom himself might be able to dodge behind time's back and have the past, that is, Hattie's present, and the garden, here, now, and forever. To manage that, of course, he must understand the workings of time. "What is time?" Tom asked Aunt Gwen when she brought him his early cup of tea, and his aunt, not believing she had heard him right, replied that it was nearly 7 o'clock. "What is time, I mean? How does time work?" Tom asked his uncle at breakfast. According to him, however, there was not one certain answer. People just had theories. "Of course," said Uncle Alan, "it used to be thought," and Tom listened attentively, and sometimes he seemed to understand, and then sometimes he was sure he didn't. "But modern theories of time," said Uncle Alan, "the most modern theories," and Tom began wondering if theories went in and out of fashion, like ladies' dresses, and then suddenly knew that he couldn't be attending, and wrenched his mind back, and thought again that he was understanding, and then again he was sure he wasn't, and experienced a great depression. "I've heard a theory too," said Tom, while his uncle paused to drink some tea. I know of an angel who said that in the end there would be time no longer." "An angel?" His uncle's shout was so explosive that a great deal of tea slopped down his tie, and he was made even angrier to have to mop it up. "What on earth have angels to do with scientific theories?" Tom trembled and dared not explain that this was more than a theory. It was a blazing angelic certitude. Uncle Alan was saying in an angry voice that he didn't want any more breakfast. He went from the house, slamming the front door after him, and 10 minutes early for work. As soon as he had gone, Aunt Gwen said reproachfully to Tom, "Tom, I wish you wouldn't." "Well," said Tom, "I didn't know he felt like that about angels, did I?" "Your uncle is as reverent as anyone about angels, in their proper place," said Aunt Gwen, "but it's very bad for him to be crossed at breakfast time. His nerves are always a little on edge so early in the morning, and before we know where we are, he has lost his temper, and then he rushes over his breakfast or leaves half of it. It all leads to indigestion." "I'm sorry," said Tom. Certainly his aunt had an insight into truth, although it was a different kind from his uncle's. That evening, as soon as Alan Kitson came in, his wife took him aside to talk to him. At first he was inclined to talk too, and at a high pitch, but towards the end he was saying nothing, and at the very end there was a pause, and then he said, "Perhaps you're right, I ought to." At supper, when he saw Tom, he said, "Tom, I apologise," so majestically that Tom felt quite crushed beneath it. Tom supposed that the subject of time would be left to rest, but his uncle was now determined to make full amends for the morning. After supper he got out pencil and paper and began to draw diagrams for Tom. "Imagine, Tom, that this is a point in time." Later he asked Tom to imagine a painter standing in a landscape and painting it, and a second painter coming behind him and painting the same landscape with the first painter's picture of the landscape in it, and yet a third painter coming up and painting the same landscape with the first painter's picture of the landscape and with the second painter's picture of the first painter's picture of the landscape, and then a fourth painter. "I hope that parallel has made things clearer to you, Tom," said his uncle. "Well, look at it another way. Suppose—" Tom's face was beginning to go stiff all over with the expression of understanding he was putting on it, and really by now he just wanted to cry, like a baby, because he understood nothing, and yet it was all so important to him. Then suddenly Uncle Alan was mentioning Rip Van Winkle. "For instance," he said, "think of Rip Van Winkle. Oh no, perhaps that's not very illuminating. No, think for instance of a new point in time which we'll call A. but Uncle Alan was too late. Tom had already begun thinking of Rip Van Winkle, because he was the first person Uncle Alan had mentioned that Tom really knew anything about. Indeed, Tom knew all about him. Rip Van Winkle had gone out hunting one day in the North American mountains and had fallen asleep in an enchanted place. It seemed to him that the time he spent sleeping there was only a night, but when he woke up and went down the mountainside to his family, he found that 20 years had gone by. Now, thought Tom, wasn't he himself rather like Rip Van Winkle in reverse, so to speak? Instead of going forward for 20 years, Tom went back 100 or more to Hattie's lifetime. He did not always go back to exactly the same time every night, nor did he take time in its usual order. The fir tree, for instance, he had seen it standing, fallen, and then standing again. It was still standing last night. He had seen Hattie as a girl of his own age, then as a much younger one, and recently as a girl who, although Tom would not fully admit it, was outgrowing him altogether. In flashes, Tom had seen Hattie's time, the garden's time, covering what must be about 10 years, while his own time achieved only the weeks of a summer holiday. You might say, Tom said slowly, coming into the conversation again without having been listening to it, you might say that different people have different times, although of course they're really all bits of the same big time. Well, said his uncle, one could say more accurately, Tom went straight on, so that I might be able for some reason to step back into someone else's time, in the past, or if you like, he saw it all suddenly and for the first time from Hattie's point of view. She might step forward into my time, which would seem the future to her, although to me it seems the present. It would be much clearer, Tom, said his uncle, to go back to this point A. But Tom was going on. Whichever way it is, she would be no more a ghost from the past than I would be a ghost from the future. We're neither of us ghosts, and the garden isn't either. That settles that. What are you talking about? Uncle Alan said irritably. Gardens? And what settles what? We're talking of possibilities, theories. But, said Tom, suppose someone really had stepped out of one time into another, just like that. Then that would be proof. Proof? Cried Uncle Alan, and for a moment Tom thought he was going to be angry again, but he controlled himself. Right, we'll leave it there for today. I'll be back again tomorrow with the next part. Find out what else Uncle Alan has got to say. In the meantime, have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.